There are voices that sing, and then there are voices that possess you. Voices that bypass the ears and go straight for the soul. They carry more than just a melody. They carry a weight, a history, a raw, undeniable truth. In the 1970s, one voice rose above all others, a veritable force of nature wrapped in velvet and grit. It was the voice of Theodore Dries Pendergrass. On stage, he was more than a singer. He was an event, a towering, sweat-drenched icon of masculine power and surprising vulnerability. He didn't just perform songs about love and seduction. He preached them, lived them right there in front of thousands of screaming, adoring fans. They called him Teddy Bear, a nickname that belied the ferocious, almost dangerous energy he commanded. He was the undisputed king of a new kind of sophisticated soul, the man who had it all. 5 consecutive platinum albums, the sold-out arenas, the Rolls-Royce, the mansion. He was the Black Elvis, a man who seemed not just famous, but invincible. But invincibility is a fragile myth. And for Teddy Pendergrass, that myth was shattered in the blink of an eye on a dark, winding road in his own hometown. His story is one of the most dramatic in music history, a rise so meteoric it seemed destined to burn out, and a fall so catastrophic it's almost impossible to comprehend. But this isn't just a story about ruin. It's a story about what happens after. It's about a man who lost everything that defined him, and in the silent darkness that followed, had to find a reason to live and a new way to sing. This is the staggering rise, the devastating fall, and the courageous rebirth of Teddy Pendergrass. Philadelphia in the late 1960s and early 1970s. This was a city with a sound all its own. While Detroit's Motown was the sound of young America, a polished, pop-infused R&B Philadelphia was cultivating something different, something warmer, lusher, more complex. It was the Sound of Philadelphia, or TSOP, the masterful creation of producers and songwriters, Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff. Gamble and Huff's Philadelphia International Records wasn't just a label, it was an institution. It was a hit factory located on South Broad Street, where they crafted a signature sound that would define an era. Imagine the raw emotion of gospel, the driving beat of funk, and the sophisticated sweep of a full-string orchestra, all fused into one seamless, soulful tapestry. This was the music of artists like the O'Jays, Billy Paul, and the 3 Degrees. It was the soundtrack for a generation of Black Americans coming into their own, a sound that was elegant and street-smart, romantic, and socially conscious. It was into this fertile, competitive, and electrifying musical landscape that a young Teddy Pendergrass was about to make his mark. Born in 1950, Theodore Dries Pendergrass grew up a world away from the glamour his future held. Raised in the gritty neighborhoods of North Philadelphia, his early life was shaped by hardship and faith. His father, Jesse Pendergrass, left the family when Teddy was just a baby. He would meet him only once, a brief encounter that left a lasting impression. Then when Teddy was 11 years old, tragedy struck. His father was stabbed to death during an altercation. The loss of a man he barely knew, but whose blood ran through his veins, created a void and a deep-seated anger that would fuel him for years. His anchor was his mother, Ida. A strong, devout woman, she saw the spark in her son from the very beginning. His voice, even as a child, was unusually powerful, filled with a maturity beyond his years. She steered him toward the church, and it was there, in the pews and the pulpit, that he first learned how to command an audience. The church was his training ground. He absorbed the rhythms of gospel, the call and response between preacher and congregation, the art of building a performance to a fever pitch of raw, unbridled emotion. Incredibly, his talent was so profound that he was ordained as a minister at the tender age of 10. This boy preacher, holding congregations spellbound with his booming voice, was unknowingly rehearsing for the stadium-sized secular sermons he would one day deliver. But the sanctified world of the church couldn't contain his ambition. The secular sounds of the city, the doo-wop on the corner, the soul music pouring from the radio, called to him. He was restless, driven, and intensely focused. He taught himself to play the drums, a skill that would be his entry ticket into the music business. He was a natural, his powerful, precise rhythms reflecting the same intensity that was in his voice. He began playing in local clubs, a teenager navigating the city's vibrant but tough music scene. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a formidable self-belief. He wasn't just hoping for a break, he was preparing for it. In 1970, that break arrived, though not in the way he might have expected. He landed a gig as the drummer for a group called the Cadillacs, who were soon hired as the backing band for a more established vocal group, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. The Blue Notes had been around since the 50s, a solid but unspectacular doo-wop and soul act. Their founder and leader, Harold Melvin, ran the group with an iron fist. He was the name, the brand, and the boss. Teddy Pendergrass was just the new kid in the back, behind the drum kit. But you can't hide a voice like Teddy's for long. During rehearsals and sound checks, he would sing along from his drum stool, his raw baritone roar cutting through everything. It was impossible to ignore. Harold Melvin heard it. The other members heard it. And most importantly, Gamble and Huff, who had recently signed the group to Philadelphia International, heard it. They knew this was not the voice of a drummer. This was the voice of a star. Soon, Teddy was coaxed from behind the drums and given the lead microphone. It was a move that would transform the Blue Notes from a legacy act into one of the most successful soul groups of the decade. The chemistry was explosive. Gamble and Huff's sophisticated songwriting and lush production found their perfect vessel in Teddy's commanding voice. Their very first album together, I Miss You, was a masterpiece. The title track was a 10-minute slow burn of heartache, but it was the ballad If You Don't Know Me By Now that became their defining anthem. On that track, Teddy's performance is a masterclass in vulnerability and power. He isn't just singing the lyrics, he's living them, his voice cracking with desperation and simmering with pride. It became a #1 R&B hit and a pop smash, and it established Teddy Pendergrass as the new sound of soul. Hit after hit followed. The driving, paranoid, Bad Luck, the epic, socially conscious Wake Up Everybody, and the pulsing proto-disco classic The Love I Lost. On stage, Teddy was simply electrifying. He was tall, powerfully built, and dripping with a raw, almost intimidating sexuality. He wasn't the smooth, choreographed performer of the Motown school. He was a preacher in a silk shirt, a man possessed by the music. He would stalk the stage, his body drenched in sweat, his voice a torrent of emotion, whipping the audience, especially the women, into a state of sheer pandemonium. He was everything the group needed to become superstars. But there was a problem, and it was right there in the group's name: Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. Teddy was the voice, the face, and the undeniable star, but Harold Melvin owned the name and controlled the finances. As their fame grew, the internal friction became unbearable. Fans would approach Teddy after shows, gushing, "Oh, Mr. Melvin, you were wonderful." Each time it happened, it was a fresh wound to Teddy's considerable pride. He felt disrespected and, more importantly, cheated. He saw the vast sums of money the group was generating and felt his share was insultingly small. He was the engine, but Harold was the one holding the keys. The tension became an open secret. By 1975, in an attempt to appease their star, The billing was officially changed to Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes featuring Theodore Pendergrass. But it was a cosmetic fix for a fundamental problem. Teddy's ego and ambition were too big to be contained as a featured player. He knew his own worth, and he was ready to bet everything on it. In 1976, at the absolute apex of the group's success, Teddy Pendergrass walked away. To many, it seemed like career suicide. He was leaving one of the biggest groups in the world to go it alone. But Teddy wasn't just walking away, he was walking toward his destiny. Any doubts about Teddy's ability to succeed on his own were obliterated the moment his solo career began. He stayed with Philadelphia International, the label he had helped build, and in 1977 released his self-titled debut album. The result was a declaration of independence and an immediate runaway success. The album went platinum, and it perfectly distilled the Pendergrass formula, smoldering ballads that promised romantic ecstasy and powerful, funky up-tempo tracks that dared you to stay in your seat. But it was on stage as a solo act that he truly became a cultural phenomenon. Freed from the constraints of the group, he crafted a persona that was pure, undiluted Teddy. He was the ultimate lover, the man who knew what women wanted and wasn't afraid to give it to them. This culminated in his legendary For Women Only concerts. These weren't just gigs, they were events. Female attendees were given white chocolate teddy bear lollipops upon entry. The atmosphere was electric, a space where female desire was not just acknowledged, but celebrated. Teddy would command the stage for hours, his performances a marathon of seduction. He'd start fully clothed in a custom-designed suit, and as the show progressed, would slowly shed layers, teasing the audience, building the temperature in the room until it reached a fever pitch. Songs like Close the Door and Turn Off the Lights became more than just songs. They were invitations, explicit instructions that drove the crowd into a frenzy. It was a level of mass adoration that was unprecedented for a black artist. The press dubbed him the Black Elvis, and for once the comparison didn't feel like hyperbole. His success was staggering. From 1977 to 1981, he released 5 consecutive platinum albums, a feat that put him in the same stratosphere as the biggest rock stars in the world. The money poured in. He bought a sprawling 34-room mansion in the suburbs of Philadelphia, once owned by the Campbell's soup heir. He drove a fleet of luxury cars, including a custom green Rolls-Royce with a TP license plate. He had his own private jet and an entourage to manage his every need. He was the living embodiment of the wake up everybody dream. A kid from the tough streets of Philly who had conquered the world. But the view from the top is often perilous. Fame on that level is isolating. The entourage that surrounded him was both a support system and a barrier, cutting him off from a normal life. And the music industry of that era had a dark, predatory underbelly. In October 1977, just as his solo career was exploding, his manager and close confidant, Tasmaya Taz Lang, was shot and killed in the garage of her home. The official ruling was a robbery homicide, but the case was never solved, and it haunted Teddy for the rest of his life. The incident was a brutal reminder of the dangers that lurked just beneath the surface of his glamorous world. Teddy himself was a complex and contradictory figure. The teddy bear persona was just that, a persona. Off stage, he could be demanding, arrogant, and had a formidable temper. He was a shrewd businessman who had learned hard lessons from his time with the Blue Notes. He was fiercely protective of his brand and his money. He was a man in total control of his career and his image. He seemed untouchable, a colossus bestriding the world of music. But no one is untouchable. and on a cool spring night in 1982, his entire world came crashing down. The date was March 18th, 1982. It was a Thursday night approaching 1:30 in the morning. Teddy was behind the wheel of his prized possession, the green Rolls-Royce. He was driving along Wissahickon Drive, a notoriously dark and winding road that runs through Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. In the passenger seat was a woman named Tenika Watson. The exact cause of the accident remains debated, but the outcome was brutally clear. The Rolls-Royce, a nearly 3-ton behemoth of steel and leather, failed to navigate a sharp curve. The brakes failed. The car careened across the road, smashed through a guardrail, and plowed head-on into 2 trees. The sound of the impact, a sickening crunch of metal and glass, shattered the nighttime stillness. Inside the wreckage there was chaos and pain. Teddy and Tenika were trapped. The dashboard had collapsed, pinning Teddy's legs. He was conscious, and he knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. He couldn't feel anything below his neck. Rescue crews worked for nearly an hour to cut them free from the mangled car. When they finally pulled him from the wreck, the verdict was swift and devastating. Teddy had suffered a C6 to C7 spinal cord injury. His neck was broken. At the age of 31, Teddy Pendergrass, the embodiment of strength, power, and virility, was paralyzed from the chest down. He was a quadriplegic. He would never walk, let alone stalk a stage again. The news hit the public like a shockwave. But the initial sympathy soon gave way to a storm of controversy and lurid speculation, fanned by the tabloid press. The identity of his passenger, Tenika Watson, became the focal point. Watson was a nightclub performer and a transgender woman, a fact that the media seized upon with cruel glee. In an instant, the narrative shifted. The accident was no longer just a tragedy, it was a scandal. The king of seduction, the ultimate ladies' man, was in a car crash with a transgender woman. The press had a field day, using the revelation to question and mock the very hypermasculine image he had so carefully cultivated. For Teddy, lying helpless in a hospital bed, this public spectacle was a secondary, distant horror. The primary horror was his new reality. The man who had commanded stadiums now couldn't perform the simplest tasks. He couldn't feed himself, bathe himself, or even turn over in bed without assistance. The physical pain was relentless, but the psychological agony was 1,000 times worse. He was plunged into a profound and suffocating depression. In his searingly honest autobiography, Truly Blessed, he described this period as a living hell. He was filled with a volcanic rage at God, at the world, at himself. He felt his life was over. The man he had been was gone, replaced by this broken, helpless body. He openly contemplated suicide, at one point asking his then-girlfriend to help him end his suffering. The paralysis had severely weakened his diaphragm and abdominal muscles, the very core of his vocal power. The mighty baritone that had sold millions of records was gone, replaced by a thin, weak whisper. He had lost his legs. He had lost his mobility, and now, it seemed, he had lost his voice. The ruin felt total and absolute, but the story of Teddy Pendergrass does not end in ruin. It is in this crucible of suffering that the second and perhaps more profound chapter of his life begins. The journey back was agonizingly slow, a day-by-day battle against despair. He was surrounded by a small, fiercely loyal circle of support. His mother, Ida, was a constant, prayerful presence. And his manager, Shep Gordon, a legendary figure in his own right, refused to let his friend and client simply disappear. Shep was Teddy's champion, fighting for him when he couldn't fight for himself. Slowly, painstakingly, Teddy began the grueling process of rehabilitation. He had to retrain his body and his mind, and he had to find his voice again. Through sheer force of will and with the help of therapists, He began to relearn how to sing, discovering new ways to use his weakened muscles to support his breath and produce a tone. It was a humbling, frustrating process, but with each small victory, a flicker of hope was reignited. He started to see his situation not as a death sentence, but as a test. He had been stripped of everything superficial, forced to find a new source of strength, a new definition of self. 2 years after the accident, in 1984, he did what many thought was impossible. He released a new album, Love Language. The album was a commercial success, going gold, and proving that his audience had not forgotten him. But the true, undeniable moment of his resurrection was yet to come. July 13th, 1985. The stage was Live Aid, a massive global concert for famine relief, held simultaneously in London and Teddy's hometown of Philadelphia. In front of 100,000 people at JFK Stadium and a worldwide television audience of nearly 2 billion, Teddy Pendergrass made his first public appearance since the accident. He was wheeled onto the stage by the musical duo Ashford and Simpson. The crowd fell into a stunned, respectful silence. He looked frail, confined to his wheelchair, a stark and shocking contrast to the commanding figure they remembered. He spoke to the crowd, his voice quiet but steady. And then he sang. He performed the Diana Ross classic, Reach Out and Touch Somebody's Hand. His voice wasn't the thunderous roar of old. It was different. It was quieter, more measured, but it was imbued with a depth of pain, experience, and resilience that was breathtaking. It was the sound of survival. As he sang, tears streamed down the faces of people in the audience. It was one of the most powerful and emotional moments in music history. It was more than a comeback. It was a transfiguration. He was no longer just a sex symbol. He had become a symbol of human endurance. In the years that followed, Teddy embraced his new reality. He continued to record music, scoring a #1 R&B hit in 1988 with the optimistic anthem, Joy. He even returned to touring, performing his full concerts from a specially designed wheelchair. The shows were different, of course. The wild sexual energy was replaced by a sense of shared experience, a deep emotional connection between the artist and his loyal fans. He had found a new way to be Teddy Pendergrass. His life after the accident was dedicated to more than just music. In 1998, he founded the Teddy Pendergrass Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping others with spinal cord injuries. He became a powerful advocate, using his fame to raise awareness and funds for a cause that was now his life's work. He found personal happiness as well, marrying Karen Still in 1987 and becoming a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. He found a measure of peace that had perhaps eluded him even at the height of his fame. So what is the lasting significance of Teddy Pendergrass? His musical legacy is secure. He was a titan of soul and R&B, a crucial link between the classic sound of the 60s and the modern R&B that followed. His vocal style has influenced generations of singers, from Luther Vandross to Drake, but his true importance lies in the full, complex arc of his life. His story is a profound and often uncomfortable exploration of Black masculinity, fame, and disability. He was an artist who was first celebrated for his body, his physical power, and his sexuality. And then he was forced to live a life of the mind and the spirit. His journey from a symbol of virility to a symbol of vulnerability and back to a new kind of strength challenges all our easy definitions. He showed us that true strength isn't about physical prowess or the absence of pain. It's about the courage to continue in the face of it. He exposed the fickle and often cruel nature of celebrity, but also demonstrated the incredible power of a loyal audience and a resilient human spirit. Teddy Pendergrass passed away in 2010 at the age of 59. He left behind a catalog of music that remains timeless, a soundtrack of love, heartache, and joy. But he also left behind a story of two lives. The first was a life of incredible, almost mythical success. The second was a life of unimaginable struggle and ultimately profound grace. To remember him only for the tragedy is to miss the far greater story of his triumph. He was the man who had it all, lost it all, and then found a way to be whole again. He was the voice that could close the door and turn off the lights, but he was also the voice that, in the darkest of rooms, taught us all how to find a flicker of joy. He was, in the truest sense of the word, blessed.